This isn't going to be your typical unboxing. I promise you, really going to be different because this is a Qing Dynasty Jian that I had fully restored. And I've been really waiting to get this back from the polisher. I really didn't like to have to wait to set up to film. I want to open up, but you know, this is the kind of treasure it's great to share with other people. When I acquired this, it was in really not the best shape. It has, the blade was basically a chocolate brown, just very thick patina. It took me 3 hours to clean that. The other thing is that it was in a new scabbard, a replaced scabbard that was pine or some very soft wood. It had some kind of red goo on the scabbard. In fact, the polisher even said he hope it doesn't get cancer taking it, just kind of get the fittings off, because I think it was some sort of imitation lacquer, but it was really nasty stuff. So, you know, it was really quite not in the best state, but now it's just fantastic. It's just beautiful. The thing that immediately jumps right out at you is the fittings. They're really very, very unusual fittings. Clearly some sort of European influence. And I'm going to come back to that because that gives us some ideas to the dating of this, Jian. But I would say, now I'm no expert on European art, so if somebody has some insight, please do share it in the comments. But I would say this is sort of a European Rococo thinking. You know, it's just the way it's very stylized, almost kind of like Art Nouveau, but of course it's not. It's from a much earlier period. And these are butterflies, I would say. You know, I looked at this with some friends in China, the smiths that we use in Longtren, and they said, no, it looks kind of more like bats to them. But, you know, when I look at the fittings and, you know, the stylized, so it's a matter of opinion, especially the scabbard fittings. You look at this scabbard fitting here, you know, with the way the eyes are, I would say that's a butterfly. But, you know, either one is very common, both bats and butterflies. Butterfly is hudie in Mandarin. Hu means is a homonym for protect. So you often have that butterflies on things for protecting children, or even on swords, you know, which is kind of funny. We don't think of butterflies as being a very martial sort of animal or insect, but you very definitely found them. Beautiful piece. The scabbard has been completely renewed. So that's a Huanghuali type of wood. Really beautiful. I believe this particular piece was collected about 10 years plus ago in Vietnam by the polisher, and he's been sitting on it, and I'm very happy that he used it for this project. The other thing that stands out right away that's very interesting is that this piece has obviously been through a lot in its life. Look at the blade in a moment. The fittings are the same style, right? It has, here you have that butterfly fitting and a swirling sort of, what you call almost like ferns or something in the pommel there. But if you look at here, it's this very same style for the scabbard fittings, but clearly slightly different coloration. So we know it's from a different batch. And also the work isn't quite as nice. It was hard to see that in the condition I got it. But once it got cleaned, it was like, yeah, okay. At some point, the scabbard was lost. The original scabbard was probably lost, undoubtedly lost, and then this was replaced. So that's also telling us this was a sword that was of some value to people, because even after the scabbard was somehow lost, it was recreated, albeit by a craftsman not quite as skilled as the one who created the hilt fittings. Let's take a look at that blade. Oh, it's a really stout, heavy blade. Not quite as heavy as I was remembering it to be. Really beautiful. And it's got that hum. I always love that hum. Wow. That's really nice. You know, it's this kind of thing, of course, and you gotta get out there. If you're really interested in this, meet people who are collectors, get to be friends with them, and then come back and like get to handle some sorts, because you have to handle a bunch of them. You just feel this feel. I've done this in other videos. Just hold it, you know, between your two fingers like that, so it's held loosely. Don't grip it tight, and you just tap that pommel, just give it a little ding, and you can feel. And this is very useful when a sword is not in a restored condition. You can feel, you know, is it a good piece? You know, how well is it done? And this is just, it has a real fine kind of hum to it, and that tells me a lot about the sword. So a real beautiful piece. Boom, and very nice. Of course, when you get your blade back from the polisher, you've got to give it a little, take it out for a test drive. Very interesting piece. The other thing is interesting about this, as far as these fittings go, we're talking about, what does that tell us maybe about the age? It's very unusual. It's definitely a European influence. And that really pretty much only happened during the Qianlong period. So, that's the 18th century. Qianlong ruled from, I think it was 1736 to 1796, something like that. 1799 is when he passed. Check me on those dates. And during his reign, he had swords made for himself, over 100 Jian and 100 Dao. There was a collection of 100 and 100, and then he had other swords as well. And many of those have influences from foreign cultures, including European. So that is a strong indication that this Jian dates from the Qianlong period. That because it was very solid, the hilt, the polisher didn't take it apart. It's all been peened over and it's real solid. When that's the case, you don't want to take it apart because it might be some damage. So the only way we could have really gotten a good sense of the age was to see that tang and judge from the coloration of that patina, but we didn't do it in this case. So we have to go by this sort of secondary evidence, and that would be the style of the fitting. So I would say there's a very good chance that this is Qianlong. And also, let's have a look. The polisher gave me his rundown, his opinion on the blade. And that's very valuable because he's worked with lots of blades, and a polisher, and he's putting the blade on the stones, he's feeling that interaction, how hard it is, where is it harder, where is it softer, is it too soft, is it too hard? All those sort of things, are not just something he sees or reads, he's feeling that in his hands. So love to get the polisher's feedback on the blade. And here's what he wrote me. He said, no lamination flaws, which is of course great, active pattern along the central zone with a distinct transition towards the edges. This is clearly a custom quality work for an official or an institution like a temple with good disposable income. So in other words, this is a sword for somebody, with deep pockets. I would definitely concur. This had to be a gift. It was, it's a finer kind of sword with these sort of fittings, blades, when it's a fighting Jian, if it's a blade, whether it's a guy for the commoner or the highest ranked guy, you need to have a good solid blade. You can't really scrimp and save on the blade. But when you find a sword with this level, with fittings of this kind of quality, this kind of workmanship, and also I should add, this fluted grip. I mean, it's just something that makes it more beautiful. That fluting of that grip doesn't change that functionality of this Jian. So that's something that's done just because you have the money to do it. So I think this very definitely was a piece that was made to be given to a temple, a votive piece, or as a gift for a high official, from one high official to another. So he says, the layers are very fine. This pattern doesn't jump out at you from across the room. It should be studied like the hara on a Japanese blade. So it's a really tight, fine grain. About a third of the way from the hilt, where the edges transition from blunt to sharp, there is a crosswise color change in the steel from the heat treating. And that's very interesting. This is something we've often discussed here. In Chinese sword arts, we're deflecting with the flat of the blade. What he's talking about here is that in the heat treat, this was areas made a slightly softer so that it's more shock absorbent. When you're deflecting, that's going to be more resilient. When you deflect with that blade flat, comes in, boom, taking that blade flat, getting a powerful blow from the side, and come in and deflect with that flat. That's going to be more able, more resilient, because it's been heat treated differently. Also mentioned that it's relatively blunt at the base. That tells us also that it's in a relatively early polish. Obviously, just had one polish when I acquired it. I saw that, I thought, oh, this might be in its initial polish. So this might only be the second or third polish that this Jian has ever had, which would be quite rare for a sword that potentially dates from the 18th century. So that tells us also it was probably made and carried by somebody of high rank who didn't really see any fighting. This blade does not seem to have had seen any kind of action. I don't see any sign at all. Of course, the polishing would have taken some of that away, but before. When I first got it, I looked at it very carefully. It didn't appear to have seen any sort of action. So we know that, this was made as a piece to be carried by a high official or in a temple. And that's another reason why it hasn't seen repeated polishings. And as they did in the Qing period, they left this area basically unsharpened. You'll have like a millimeter or two of dull edge down toward the base here. All right, let's see what else the polisher has to say. The smith wanted to avoid brittleness at the fort, knowing that this area takes the brunt of the force when parrying heavy weapons like pole arms, so he handled the hardening of the blade accordingly. That's really interesting. Hardening of the blade was handled accordingly to keep that base area relatively soft. This is not a change in the steel. You'll note that the laminar pattern continues uninterrupted over this color change line. So very interesting. I love to get that feedback from the polisher. Now, another thing everybody always wants to know is how long is it and what does it weigh? I didn't measure it before I sent it out, but I have my tape measure here. So let's have a quick look at that. When you measure a blade, the standard is to the base of the guard, and it's 28 and nearly a half inches and 72 centimeters. So pretty standard Jian length. Altogether, it's 35 inches or 89 centimeters. So pretty good standard fighting kind of length for a Jian. That's a good length. Let's see what the weight is. So it's 1,074 grams, which is 2 pounds, 6 ounces, or 2.37 pounds. If we're looking at this Jian from a using point of view, is that it's also on the heavy side. I mean, you can see, I am having no trouble swinging it around, moving it, but I'm not having to swing it for very long. If I were in combat or in a duel, I would honestly pick a sword a little bit lighter. So this is certainly balanced well enough, balanced so that I can wield it. I could certainly train with it, but, probably wouldn't want to have a duel with it, because if the duel went on for very long, it could wear out your arm. And of course, there's always that potential for some overcarry with a blade of this weight. So again, I think that's saying this was a blade meant for presentation, not meant probably for fighting. And again, it hasn't seen in action. So what do we got? We have probably a Qianlong period presentation sword with these very unusual, very atypical sort of European style of fittings, and something that obviously was treasured and passed on, because when the scabbard was lost, one was recreated. If it isn't obvious, I'm really quite happy. It's a wonderful sword that I'm happy to have here at the Wuguan, and very happy to share with everybody. If you enjoyed this video, of course, we'd love you to subscribe and hit that bell. And consider also hitting that join button. Help us produce more videos for you and everybody else. Until next time, everybody, stay strong. 再见.